Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new edition of Euroquestions, the bi-monthly webinar of the Jacques Delors Institute. Today, we have the pleasure to welcome Karin Chalbert, researcher at the Jacques Delors Energy Center. The European clean energy transition is speeding up. During the actual European mandate, which is nearly ending, extensive regulatory progress has been made in the form of the European Green Deal and through the energy and climate legislation package Fit for 55. As we enter the implementation phase of these policies, understanding and supportive citizen engagement in the energy transition is becoming more and more important. To this end, the EnergyPROSPECTS project has explored the potential of energy citizenship. So what is energy citizenship? It provides a visual lens to capture the diversity of citizen engagement in the energy transition. The concept denotes different forms of civic involvement and engagement in the fields of energy production, distribution, and consumption, as well as the governance of the energy transition. The clean energy transition is becoming everyone's business. What does it mean for citizens involved at the European energy transition? Karin, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Lara. It's a pleasure to be back. So during the past 3 years, I have been involved together with some of my colleagues in the Energy Center in the EnergyPROSPECTS project, where we have examined the potential, as Lara said, of energy citizenship, and in particular, the potential it has to contribute to a more sustainable but also democratic energy transition. And this project has been carried out within the framework of Horizon 2020 research grant. And the research that we carried out together has been done with 6 universities across Europe and 2 other non-governmental organizations. So, what is energy citizenship? Like Lara said, this is a concept. Perhaps we don't believe that this term will ever be adopted by policymakers per se in legislation, but what it has done and what it has allowed us to do within the project is to look at citizen engagement and involvement in the European energy transition in a holistic way. So for us, the concept encompasses various forms of civic involvement and engagement that can be practiced at different forms, different levels of action through different constellations of actors in the fields of energy production, consumption, and the governance of energy and climate transition, just like Lara said. You can change the slide. So one of the first things we did in this project was that we mapped almost 600 cases of energy citizenship throughout Europe and also in the accession countries and in the EEA countries to really, we really saw the diversity that exists. This mapping is not representative, but it shows the diversity. And this database that you can see a screenshot of in my presentation is available on our project website. And one thing that's very interesting then is that we've been able to see, for example, how citizen engagement in the energy transition, how it varies depending on the context. So for example, our Irish partner has looked at a lot of Irish initiatives, and it's interesting to see how they develop and in a context where policymakers are very supportive of citizen engagement, as opposed to perhaps in Hungary. So it exists everywhere, but it takes very varied forms depending on the support it receives, but also obviously due to cultural, geographical conditions, etc. Change the slide, please. Yes. I'm sorry, you need to go back 2 slides. One more. Yeah, I'm sorry, I mixed up my slides a little bit there, but don't worry. So, for example, like I said, practices in the private sphere. I just wanted to give you some examples so that we get a little bit concrete in what we talk about. Yeah, it could be very traditional practices, such as switching to a green electricity provider, could be becoming a prosumer through the installation of solar panels, but it could also be practices such as aspiring for self-sufficiency through off-grid energy sources and storage technologies. Within the private and public organizations, which is a very interesting one, is, for example, how citizens within the framework of organizations can contribute to develop new practices, business models, and partnerships that contribute to the energy transition, or for example, initiate energy saving campaigns or clean mobility plans at the workplace. In the public sphere, it's more about citizen consultations. It's about making your voice heard through voting, etc. I'm not mentioning all of them, but just to give you a couple of examples. Then we have a very promising category that we have spent a lot of work on, which is also where there's a need for more support from the EU, for example, and that's in collective action that is within a citizen-based organization, but also in these really interesting partnerships that we see across the continent, where citizen-based organizations, together with, for example, local authorities, private actors, such as investors and different types of businesses, and also NGOs, go together and create different types of projects together that support citizens to get involved. For example, by producing renewable energy, helping communities to carry out energy renovations in larger scales, etc. Lastly, we have the social movements. So it can be either to enhance acceptance of certain policies, but also to protest them. So sorry for the little mix-up. Let's go right ahead. So we also carried out, so having done this mapping, we have carried out a whole lot of analysis within the project, but a very interesting one was a survey we did on over 10,000 European citizens on how they perceive their own roles and how they within the energy transition, and how they perceive the European energy transition and its progress to date. And it really kind of underlines a lot of the things that we had seen in our own in the previous analysis that we had made on the main kind of barriers, but also enablers. So some of the takeaways that stood out to me from this survey was that the respondents generally perceive their roles in the energy transition as very limited to those actions that are taken individually or in the framework of their households. So very much what I said, the more traditional measures perhaps in the private sphere. And it was also perhaps unsurprisingly the most common ways to engage. Another takeaway that stood out a bit is that a majority of the respondents actually believe that they will pay more for energy in the years to come. And a lot of, very few actually feel that the energy transition is on the right track. Either a lot of people believe that it needs to speed up out of climate worries, etc. And some people also perceive that it's heading in the completely wrong direction. Just to show you a little bit of, the perceptions of citizens in all this. Another thing that stood out is that a lot of majority of the respondents actually said that they believe that decision makers do not take their views and opinions seriously into energy policy making. And lastly, when ranking different policy measures that they perceive as that would be the most efficient to really enable citizens to engage with, which also corresponds to a lot of other types of EU level surveys, is that so that the clean energy transition must be accessible, affordable for everyone, and that we also need to prioritize vulnerable citizens and all this. So the people who have the less capacity to change. We can change the slide. So why am I telling you all this? Because among all of those initiatives that we let's see, among all of those initiatives that we mapped, a lot of them are actually showing us very interesting ways on how citizens are engaging today and how a lot of these initiatives work to enable citizens to act. And here I put this graph on which actors initiate these initiatives, just to show the diversity here also, because energy citizenship has often kind of how to say, it's often been treated as synonym to energy communities. And while we have looked at energy communities here as well, it's important to note that a wide variety of actors, like I said, municipalities, but also private actors in partnerships with NGOs and citizen-based organizations, not only energy communities, present very interesting ideas and initiatives. So they can take the form not only of communities, but they can be different types of businesses, partnerships, collaborations, networks, and all of these different types of, avenues for action should require recognition and support. We can go to the next one. And here I just wanted to say that within all of the mapping we did, that still public funding remains the primary source of financing for these types of initiatives. We can move on ahead. So I'm being very general now, but obviously within the project we have developed quite so specific policy briefs, where, for example, in this policy brief that's kind of represented in this slide, we have looked at how energy citizenship initiatives can act as opportunity spaces for citizens to overcome the barriers that they face, such as lack of knowledge, lack of time, lack of financial resources, maybe, etc. And this is obviously available on our website, so you can read it more in detail. And I think I don't have too much time to go into detail, so we can move on to the next slide. And one analysis that we did that's also represented in one of the policy briefs, we have written 4 in total, is on, so remember I told you about how these different types of initiatives involving different types of stakeholders are showing very promising and interesting ways to make citizens engage, but also to contribute to a more democratic and a more environmentally sustainable energy transition. And in this policy brief, we have looked at 8 good practice initiatives. So they're led by different organizations, different types of actors, like I said, where they have really integrated both social, so citizen participation and control, but also democratic governance to cover the how can energy citizenship contribute to a more democratic energy transition. as well as affordability and accessibility, that also has a big bearing on the democratic aspects and the social justice aspects of the transition. So we can go to the next slide. So basically what we want to really convey is also in moving towards like a framework for citizen transition that is more holistic and more comprehensive. We are saying that, so you need to start at the bottom. You need to make the energy transition, like the necessary changes that everyone has to undertake needs to be easy, accessible, and affordable, and taking particular care of the most vulnerable. And here, these energy citizenship initiatives show a great potential to be scaled up. And then for those who want to go further, for example, these actors then who initiate these types of initiatives, they need to be enabled to create these opportunity spaces to contribute to change. So moving to my last slides. So like I said, we have 4 policy briefs, one directed towards national policymakers, one EU policymakers, one that particularly outlines the business and social innovation models, and one that talks about empowerment for collective energy citizenship. They'll be available next week. And just very quickly, I put together 2 slides with an overview on some of the recommendations. So very briefly,
very brief,
sorry, Lara. For example, we saw in the beginning in the survey that I talked about that citizens perceive their kind of action space within the energy transition to be limited to the private sphere. And here we need to work together to boost perceptions of the possibilities that actually exist. And for example, within offers that already exist from relevant EU initiatives like the Energy Community Repository, etc., to include support for how energy citizenship initiatives can be better at outreach and including people beyond those who are already within the initiative. There are many more recommendations where that came from, as you can see in the slide. If you just move to the next slide, here are several more. One of the more perhaps interesting recommendations here is also, so as I said, energy citizenship has often been conflated with energy communities. And so we believe that it would be a nice complement at the EU level. So as I said, we have the repository for energy communities, but to also have perhaps European facility that goes wider, that kind of targets citizen involvement in different types of innovative energy initiatives, where they could share best practices and provide calls for technical assistance and financial support beyond energy communities. Thank you. I'll stop there, but please go and read our policy brief to get all the detailed recommendations that I wasn't able to cover here.
Well, thank you, Karin, for your presentation and work on EU citizenship. EU energy citizenship, sorry. We received a few questions. Maybe a first one that I'd like to ask is, could you please share some good practices initiative from France, since we are located in Paris currently?
Yeah, sure. So one very interesting initiative that we mapped within the project is this Maine-et-Loire Charter. So it's the Département Maine-et-Loire. So the charter is like a document of the values and the roadmap for what they're going to do. But there, the department has brought together a mix of public energy actors, private developers and citizen-based networks and organizations, and they have come together, they pooling their competences and their resources, while towards the common goal of accelerating renewable energy deployment within that department, while also safeguarding local interests and citizen voices in the project. So this is a very interesting case. It's quite new. This charter was signed in 2023, like 1 year ago, but it's something to look out for. And then we also have, so more enabling energy citizenship in the private sphere is Hauts-de-France 4 Innovation, which is a project carried out by a regional one-stop shop. So they support citizens to undertake energy renovation, and they do so while using a very innovative business model or financing model. So they have, they have a dedicated fund through French public funding and subsidies for energy renovation that they pool, and they advance the payments for the energy renovations so that the person benefiting from the energy renovation has a very small upfront cost. And what happens then, once the energy renovation has been carried out, and this is where the innovative part come in, is that the repayment period can be very long, depending on the financial capacities on the person, and they will take the money saved by the energy efficiency measures carried out and deduct that from the repayment plan. And we believe that these are two good practice cases from France that could be tested and spread even to other European countries.
Thank you, Karin. Maybe a second question regarding your work with the EnergyPROSPECTS project. What are some of the biggest obstacles for improving citizen engagement in the energy transition, according to you and your findings?
Well, for me, I believe there are these kind of three components. So it's the socioeconomic barriers, it's the financial capacity that people would have to invest. Today, we see that the people who, for example, invest in renewable energy sources, like in their solar panels, but also energy efficiency measures, are usually people with higher levels of education and who are more well off. And this needs to be evened out, because otherwise, and it needs to be rendered much more affordable and accessible, and also people need to be provided with the right technical and administrative support to be able to, for example, utilize the different subsidies that are available, because otherwise it's risk creating a situation also when energy prices continue to rise, and then maybe the more affluent people in society are able to actually reduce their energy costs by the energy efficiency measures and the renewable, for example, solar panels that they have installed. It risks just making the injustices worse. So for me, the socioeconomic part, so making the measures that everyone have to undertake affordable, accessible, is like the basis. It's a big barrier. Another big barrier that I see is, so we talk a lot about, the rise of populism and how they kind of instrumentalize the fear that people have, what the energy transition will entail. Also, very much related to these socioeconomic concerns, that the energy transition is something for the rich. Here, kind of to build trust also, which is another one of the biggest barriers also that we've seen when we looked across the project countries. And here I believe, so the socioeconomic aspects are part of building this trust, but another part is creating spaces for dialogue, which is another one of the recommendations, and they're quite specific how this could be integrated into the legislative processes at the EU level, but also importantly at local and national levels. And I think those are two big barriers in addition to all the barriers that exist that has to do with, so for example, these different types of initiatives that we were talking about, the energy citizenship initiatives. There are a bunch of regulatory barriers that prevents them from scaling up and having bigger impact.
Thank you, Karin. Maybe a last question. You were just mentioning the rise of populism toward the climate policy. So how will the EU election results impact the future of energy in Europe? Maybe it's a broader question than the energy citizenship.
Yeah, but I think the energy citizenship is very much linked to this in many ways, because it's about how people actually, how they live, how they experience, and how they take part in the energy transition. And the energy transition, I mean, it has to do with our everyday lives. It has to do with how we move, how we live, how we eat, how we work, etc., etc. I mean, energy impacts all parts of society. I think, how will it impact the energy transition? I think if we will see, which appears to be a likely case, a kind of a right turn and towards also the radical right within the European Parliament, I think we will see at least implementation, ambition slowing down. And because what we saw, for example, in that paper I was here presenting last time on populism, was that those parties, they don't have a lot of constructive suggestions themselves. So I think there will be a lot of, there could be a lot of instances just of delaying. But of course, we hope that the results in this project can also feed into, progressive European parties, how they tackle citizen involvement and engagement in the transition, and also how the next commission will tackle this. And so we welcome them all to reach out to talk to us, and also to read our policy briefs.
Well, thank you, Karin, for your presentation, and thank you to you for following today's webinar. We will send the replay over to you this afternoon. The next session will be held on Wednesday, 50th of May, and we will soon confirm the topic in a few days. So thank you again for your participation. Thank you again, Karin, and see you next time. Tack, Karin.
Mycket.